from serial killers to genocidal world leaders. Join us today as we ask, where did their parents go wrong? Today's video was requested by Liesl M. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 6. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy is one of the most notorious serial killers in the history of the United States. He murdered at least 30 people, kept gruesome trophies of his victims, and performed necrophilia on their bodies. Indications of the man he'd become may have been present ever since he was 3 years old. That's when his aunt woke up from a nap to find herself surrounded by knives from the kitchen and Bundy standing by the bed, smiling. Bundy never knew his father and resented his mother for not talking about him. There's even a theory that his real father was actually his violent and abusive grandfather, Samuel. He expressed hatred towards a number of races and would beat his wife, his daughters, and the family dog. Bundy's early years while he was living with his grandparents were undoubtedly confusing. To manage the stigma of being born out of wedlock, he was told that his mother was his older sister and that his grandparents were his biological mother and father. By the time he was a teenager, Bundy couldn't understand interpersonal relationships. He developed a fascination for sexual violence and dead or maimed bodies. It wasn't long before he put his deranged fantasies into practice. Before we move on, answer this question. In 1969 in Los Angeles, California, a series of brutal murders were committed by a group known as A. the Manson family, B. the Bloody Benders, C. the Kelly family, D. the Night Stalkers. Let us know what you think in the comments section below and stay tuned to find out the right answer. Number 5. Alexander Pichushkin. It may seem peculiar, but Alexander Pichushkin's rise as a serial killer might have been avoided by his parents paying more attention to him on the playground. When he was just a child, Pichushkin was struck in the forehead by a swing. Up until that point, he'd been a sociable child, but he became hostile and impulsive. Experts argue that this was because of damage to his frontal cortex. Pichushkin became prolific in chess and would often play in Moscow's Bitsa Park. It was a passion instilled and encouraged in him by his grandfather. Pichushkin found that by dominating on the chessboard, he could channel his aggression. When his grandfather died, Pichushkin was deeply affected and began drinking vodka in large quantities. Soon his violent impulses went beyond his control and he started killing in 1992. Most of his victims were elderly homeless men whom he lured with the promise of vodka. From behind, he would strike them in the back of the head with a hammer. In what would become his signature move, he would then stick a vodka bottle in the gaping wound. Many of the killings were committed in Bitsa Park. He was convicted for 49 murders committed between 1992 to 2006. Pichushkin claimed he actually had a death toll of 60 and that he'd been going for 64 victims, the total number of squares on a chessboard. Number 4. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar is known in history by many names including the Boss, the Lord, or Sir Pablo, each indicative of the prestige he achieved in the criminal world. His distribution operation dominated cocaine trade into the US in the 1980s and earned him billions of dollars. The King of Cocaine remains the wealthiest criminal in history, a title that represented the culmination of a lifelong ambition. Born to a farmer and an elementary school teacher, Escobar was the third of 7 children. His parents did little to tame his criminal pursuits, which began at an early age. It's been suggested that his mother was actually one of his greatest supporters, from his rise to prominence to the height of his power. As a teen, he stole gravestones, sanded them down and resold them to local smugglers. He'd run petty street scams, steal cars, and sell fake lottery tickets or contraband cigarettes. Young Pablo's dream was to have 1 million pesos in the bank by the time he turned 22. By the time he was 26, Escobar reportedly fulfilled that ambition 100 times over. In 1975, he started his own cocaine distribution business, which ultimately grew to monopolize the trade. Throughout his criminal career, Escobar ordered the killings of thousands, including journalists, police officers, and government officials. He planned the bombing of an aircraft, killing 107 people, in an attempt to eliminate a single presidential candidate. His unquenchable taste for power led to his death and left the world with a polarizing figure that many career criminals see as an inspiration. Before we continue, official They Will Kill You merchandise is now available at theywillkillyou.com. Stop clowning around and check it out, because your purchases really help support the channel. Number 3. Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is far from a victim of circumstance, but it's hard to imagine his life turning out differently when considering his ancestry. His grandfather, Kim Il-sung, was the founder and first leader of North Korea, as well as the creator of the country's central philosophy, or Juche, or self-reliance. Upon his death, the mantle was passed to his son, Kim Jong-il. This decision was criticized by some as an example of establishing a dynasty, which is against the principles of socialism. Many of those who spoke out against the succession were executed. Kim Jong-un carried on in his father's footsteps as supreme leader and inherited his other titles as well. It's a position he might have been groomed for from a young age. That being said, not much is known about his early upbringing. In fact, even his exact birth date remains unknown. It's suspected that he studied in Switzerland under an assumed identity, chaperoned by a bodyguard who posed as an older student. In the 2000s, he obtained a military degree and a physics degree from universities in North Korea. According to various reports, once he became the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un's regime followed the same path as that of his predecessors. It's one marked by egregious human rights violations, summary executions, and tormenting labor camps. Number 2. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the fourth of 6 children born in 1889 to Clara Pultz and Alois Hitler. 3 of his full siblings had died in infancy, and he lived in the same household with step-siblings from his father's previous marriage. His mother was described as loving and kind, but Alois had little interest or understanding for the children. He would beat young Adolf despite his mother's efforts to protect him. When he was 8, Hitler sang in the church choir and wanted to become a priest. A major shift in his behavior came in 1900, after the death of his younger brother Edmund. He became morose and detached and would often fight with his father and teachers. Hitler wanted to become an artist, a desire that his father willfully ignored, choosing a different path for his education. Then, Alois died in 1903 and Clara succumbed to breast cancer in 1907. Alone and penniless, Hitler lived in Vienna's homeless shelters and earned money by selling watercolor works of the city's sights. As he later stated in his manifesto Mein Kampf, it was in Vienna that Hitler first started to develop anti-Semitic feelings. By the end of World War I, these feelings were exacerbated, and by the end of World War II, Hitler had become the face of evil all over the world. So, what group was responsible for a series of gruesome murders in 1969? The right answer was A, the Manson family. The name was given to a desert cult of about 100 followers led by Charles Manson in 1960s California. The members frequently used hallucinogenic drugs and saw Manson as a prophet, believing his predictions of an apocalyptic race war. 3 of Manson's followers were responsible for the brutal Tate LaBianca murders of 1969, while the family as a whole was involved in other killings, assaults, thefts, and petty crimes. Number 1. Mao Zedong. As a child, Mao Zedong was strictly disciplined by his father, who would beat him and his siblings. Mao would slowly start to develop a rebellious side, inspired by the nationalistic drive of Napoleon Bonaparte or George Washington. At age 13, his father arranged a marriage for him with a 17-year-old girl, as means of uniting their two land-owning families. Mao refused to accept her as his wife and moved away. At age 18, he severed his queue, a ponytail that indicated his allegiance to the emperor. Even though eventually his father cut off his allowance, Mao discovered socialism and developed into a rebellious intellectual. He wrote critical essays and took part in protests which showed glimpses of the man he would become. Mao Zedong would eventually rule as chairman of the Communist Party of China from its inception in 1946 until his death in 1976. During this time, Mao's Great Leap Forward campaign saw the country's transition from an agriculture-based economy to an industrial one. The move would also contribute to the deadliest famine in recorded history, with an estimated loss of life of 20 to 45 million people. Millions of others perished in labor camps or mass executions. In the end, the autocratic and totalitarian regime much reflected Mao's own upbringing. Thanks for watching. If you could go back in time and stop one of history's most evil figures, who would you choose and why? Let us know in the comments section below.